Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that everything you hate about other people is actually a mirror, reflecting the darkest parts of yourself. The colleague whose arrogance infuriates you, the friend whose selfishness disgusts you, the stranger whose weakness makes you cringe. What if they're all showing you fragments of your own hidden nature? This isn't some new age philosophy or feel-good psychology. This is one of the most disturbing and revolutionary discoveries ever, made about human consciousness, and it came from Carl Jung, a man who spent decades mapping the uncharted territories of the human psyche. Jung called this hidden part of ourselves the shadow, and he believed that confronting it wasn't just important for personal growth, it was the key to discovering why you were put on this earth. But here's what makes this truly unsettling. Most people will go their entire lives without ever meeting their shadow. They'll live in a carefully constructed reality where they see themselves as fundamentally good, rational, and well-intentioned. They'll project all their darkness onto others, pointing fingers at the world's problems while remaining blind to the identical problems festering within their own souls. You see, your shadow isn't just some abstract psychological concept. It's a living, breathing part of your psyche that contains every impulse you've denied, every desire you've suppressed, every aspect of yourself that doesn't fit the image you've created. It's your capacity for cruelty alongside your kindness, your selfishness hiding behind your generosity, your cowardice masquerading as prudence. What's terrifying is that your shadow doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. Instead, it grows, stronger in the darkness, influencing your decisions from the unconscious, sabotaging your relationships and driving you toward the very behaviors you claim to despise. It's the reason you find yourself attracted to people who embody everything you say you hate. It's why you repeat patterns that destroy your happiness while convincing yourself you're the victim. But Jung discovered something that changes everything. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's your greatest teacher. Hidden within everything you've rejected about yourself lies the raw material for your most authentic life. The qualities you've disowned don't just represent your capacity for darkness, they represent your untapped potential for wholeness. Think about the people who trigger the strongest reactions in you, the ones who make your blood boil, who seem to embody everything wrong with humanity. What if those intense emotional reactions aren't about them at all? What if they're alarm bells, alerting you to parts of yourself that you've banished to the unconscious realm of the shadow? This is where Jung's insight becomes revolutionary. He realized that the very traits we most vehemently reject in others are often the keys to understanding our deepest purpose. The lawyer who despises aggressive people might be denying their own need to fight for justice. The people pleaser who's disgusted by selfishness might be suppressing their own need for healthy boundaries. The intellectual who mocks emotional people might be cutting themselves off from their own intuitive wisdom. Your shadow contains not just your capacity for evil, but your capacity for power, authenticity, and creative force. It holds the parts of you that society taught you to hide, the aspects of your personality that didn't fit the mold of who you were supposed to be. But these rejected parts aren't defects, they're the missing pieces of your authentic self. Here's the paradox that Jung uncovered: you can't become who you're meant to be by avoiding who you are. You can't find your purpose by pretending you're perfect. You can't create meaningful change in the world by denying the darkness that exists within you. True transformation requires what Jung called shadow work, the courageous process of turning toward everything you've been running from. Most people spend their lives trying to be good, trying to fit in, trying to become some idealized version of themselves. But Jung realized that wholeness, not goodness, is the goal of psychological development. And wholeness requires integrating everything you are, including the parts you'd rather pretend don't exist. If you've made it this far, you're already different from most people. You're willing to question the comfortable narratives you've told yourself about who you are. You're ready to explore the possibility that your purpose isn't found by becoming more perfect, but by becoming more complete. So hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because we're about to venture into territory that most people are too afraid to explore. The question isn't whether you have a shadow. Everyone does. The question is whether you'll have the courage to meet it, to learn from it, and to discover how it holds the key to everything you've been searching for. Because on the other side of your greatest fears about yourself lies your greatest gift to the world. To understand why your shadow holds such power over your life, you need to understand how it was created. And this is where Jung's insights become both brilliant and deeply unsettling. Your shadow wasn't born with you. It was manufactured by the very process of becoming human. From the moment you drew your first breath, the world began teaching you who you were allowed to be. Your parents, your teachers, your society, they all had very specific ideas about what makes a person good, acceptable, worthy of love. They rewarded certain behaviors and punished others. They smiled when you showed kindness, but frowned when you showed anger. They praised your achievements, but ignored your authentic struggles. Jung called this process the development of the persona, the mask you wear to navigate social reality. Your persona is the version of yourself that gets you acceptance, approval, and survival in your particular culture. It's not evil or false, it's necessary. But here's the problem: every time you strengthened your persona, you simultaneously created your shadow. Think of it this way: for every quality you learned to express, there was another quality you learned to suppress. For every aspect of yourself that was deemed acceptable, there was another aspect that was banished to the unconscious. Your shadow is the repository of everything you had to disown, to become the person you thought you needed to be. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this dynamic when he wrote about the will to live driving human behavior beneath our rational facades. But Jung took it further, recognizing that we don't just suppress our animal instincts, we suppress entire dimensions of human potential. The child who learns that anger is unacceptable doesn't just lose their capacity for rage. They lose their capacity for righteous indignation, for setting boundaries, for protecting what they love. This is where the process becomes truly insidious. Your shadow doesn't just contain your negative qualities. It contains your unexpressed power, your authentic voice, your capacity for creative destruction and renewal. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of this when he described how civilization requires us to turn our warrior instincts inward, creating what he called ressentiment, a poisonous mixture of suppressed power and moral superiority. But Jung's insight went deeper. He realized that the shadow doesn't just hold individual repressions, it holds collective ones too. Every society has its own shadow, its own rejected aspects that get projected onto others. The qualities that your culture deems unacceptable don't disappear. They get pushed into the collective unconscious, where they fester and eventually erupt in social violence, scapegoating, and mass hysteria. This is why you find yourself so triggered by certain people or groups. It's not really about them, it's about the parts of yourself that you've learned to deny. The homeless person who disgusts you might represent your own fear of losing control. The successful person who irritates you might represent your own suppressed ambition. The emotional person who embarrasses you might represent your own unexpressed vulnerability. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, understood this dynamic intimately. He saw how ordinary people could become monsters when their shadow was activated by circumstances. But he also saw how confronting the darkness within themselves allowed some people to transcend their circumstances and find meaning even in hell. Here's what makes this psychological arrangement so dangerous. Your shadow doesn't remain passive. It actively influences your life from the unconscious, creating what Jung called autonomous complexes, patterns of thought and behavior that seem to have a life of their own. These complexes drive you toward the very situations and relationships that will force you to confront what you've been avoiding. This is why you keep attracting the same types of toxic people. This is why you find yourself repeating the same self-destructive patterns. This is why your life seems to be controlled by forces beyond your conscious understanding. Your shadow is orchestrating these experiences, not to punish you, but to force you toward integration and wholeness. Carl Jung spent years studying fairy tales, myths, and dreams because he recognized that these stories contain the psychological blueprints for shadow integration. The hero's journey isn't just about conquering external enemies, it's about confronting and integrating the rejected aspects of yourself. The dragon you must slay isn't outside you, It's the guardian of your own disowned power. But here's where most people get it wrong. They think shadow work means becoming comfortable with being bad. They think it means unleashing their destructive impulses or embracing their selfish desires. This misunderstanding has led to countless spiritual bypassing techniques and self-help, approaches that actually strengthen the shadow by giving it a different mask to wear. True shadow work isn't about becoming evil. It's about becoming real. It's about recognizing that you contain the full spectrum of human potential and that your purpose in life emerges not from your perfected self, but from your integrated self. The very qualities you've spent your life running from contain the keys to your most authentic expression and your greatest contribution to the world. The most terrifying aspect of shadow denial isn't what you consciously do. It's what happens unconsciously, in the spaces between your thoughts, in the decisions you make without realizing you're making them, in the life you create, while believing you're creating something entirely different. Your unintegrated shadow operates like a psychological immune system gone rogue, attacking not just external threats, but the very parts of yourself that could lead to genuine fulfillment. It sabotages your relationships by attracting you to people who embody your disowned qualities, then repelling you when they mirror back what you can't accept about yourself. It undermines your career by causing you to either overcompensate for perceived weaknesses or unconsciously sabotage success when it requires you to embody qualities you've rejected. Consider the phenomenon psychologists call projection, the unconscious process of attributing your own disowned qualities to others. This isn't just a minor quirk of human psychology. It's the primary way your shadow maintains control over your life. When you project your shadow onto others, you become emotionally invested in changing them, controlling them, or avoiding them entirely. Meanwhile, the real work, integrating these qualities within yourself, remains undone. This is why your most intense relationships often become battlegrounds. You're not really fighting with your partner, your boss, or your family member. You're fighting with aspects of yourself that they're unconsciously representing. The very intensity of your emotional reaction is proportional to how much of your own shadow they're reflecting back to you. The person who makes you crazy is actually showing you where your own internal civil war is raging most fiercely. But the consequences go deeper than relationship drama. Your shadow directly influences your life choices through what Jung called compensatory mechanisms. If you've built your identity around being nice, your shadow will orchestrate situations where your suppressed anger gets expressed in passive-aggressive ways that ultimately cause more damage than honest confrontation would have. If you've built your identity around being rational, your shadow will undermine your logical plans through inexplicable emotional decisions that seem to come from nowhere. This is why people often find themselves living lives that feel fundamentally misaligned with who they think they are. The successful business person who feels empty despite their achievements. The spiritual seeker who becomes increasingly judgmental and self-righteous. The activist who burns out from fighting external battles while avoiding internal ones. They're all experiencing the consequences of shadow-driven compensation. Your shadow also shapes your perception of reality through cognitive biases that operate below conscious awareness. The confirmation bias isn't just about seeking information that supports your beliefs. It's about unconsciously filtering reality to maintain the artificial split between your persona and your shadow. You literally cannot see possibilities, opportunities, or solutions that would require you to embody disowned aspects of yourself. This perceptual distortion extends to how you interpret your own life story. The narrative you tell about your past, your struggles, and your goals is heavily influenced by what your shadow needs to remain hidden. You might convince yourself that you're a victim of circumstances when you're actually avoiding taking responsibility for your power. Or you might convince yourself that you're entirely self-made when you're actually avoiding acknowledging your need for support and connection. The neurological research on unconscious processing reveals just how sophisticated these shadow mechanisms are. Your brain processes millions of bits of information every second, but only allows a tiny fraction into conscious awareness. The filtering system that determines what reaches consciousness is heavily influenced by your psychological defenses, including shadow projections. You're literally living in a reality that's been edited by your unconscious to maintain your psychological homeostasis. This is why traditional approaches to personal development often fail. They try to build new habits and beliefs on top of an unconscious foundation that's actively working against integration. It's like trying to build a house on quicksand while pretending the ground is solid. The more effort you put into becoming your idealized self, the more energy your shadow accumulates to eventually undermine your progress. But perhaps the most tragic consequences of shadow denial is how it prevents you from accessing your authentic, creative power. Your greatest gifts often lie in the exact qualities you've learned to suppress. The person who's afraid of their own intensity might be denying their capacity for passionate leadership. The person who's ashamed of their sensitivity might be cutting themselves off from profound intuitive abilities. The person who's terrified of their own darkness might be avoiding the depth of wisdom that comes from facing life's hardest truths. Your shadow doesn't just contain your capacity for destruction, it contains your capacity for creative destruction, for breaking down false structures and building something more authentic in their place. This is why many people feel simultaneously drawn to and terrified of their own potential. They sense that becoming who they're meant to be will require destroying who they've been pretending to be. The cost of this avoidance isn't just personal, it's collective. When entire societies operate from collective shadow projections, the results are catastrophic. Wars, genocides, environmental destruction, systemic oppression, all of these emerge from the same dynamic playing out on a massive scale. Groups project their collective shadow onto other groups, then feel justified in attacking or oppressing them. Understanding this helps explain why the world's problems seem so intractable despite centuries of well-intentioned efforts to solve them. You cannot heal what you refuse to acknowledge, you cannot transform what you're unconsciously perpetuating, and you cannot create authentic change in the world while avoiding authentic change within yourself. The path to shadow integration isn't about becoming a better person, it's about becoming a complete person. And this requires a fundamental rebellion against everything you've been taught about what it means to be good, successful, or worthy of love. This rebellion begins with a radical shift in how you interpret your emotional reactions to others. Instead of asking what's wrong with them, start asking what part of me am I seeing reflected in this person. This isn't about making excuses for harmful behavior or becoming a doormat. It's about recognizing that your strongest emotional reactions are always pointing toward your own unintegrated material. Jung discovered that the people who trigger you most intensely are your greatest teachers, not because they're showing you how not to be, but because they're showing you parts of yourself that you need to reclaim. The colleague whose confidence you call arrogance might be showing you your own suppressed leadership abilities. The friend whose directness you call rudeness might be reflecting your own need to set stronger boundaries. The person whose emotionality you find overwhelming might be mirroring your own rejected sensitivity. But here's where this process becomes truly revolutionary. You don't integrate your shadow by becoming like the people who trigger you. You integrate it by finding the healthy expression of those qualities within yourself. The goal isn't to become arrogant, rude, or overwhelming. It's to find your authentic confidence, directness, and emotional range. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism that bridges conscious and unconscious material to create something entirely new. When you consciously engage with your shadow qualities, instead of projecting them onto others, you don't just add them to your personality, you transform them into higher expressions of human potential. Consider the historical examples of people who successfully integrated their shadow and changed the world in the process. Gandhi's profound gentleness emerged from his conscious integration of his capacity for aggression. He channeled his warrior energy into non-violent resistance that proved more powerful than armies. Martin Luther King Jr.'s transformational leadership came from his ability to hold both love and righteous anger simultaneously, refusing to split them into separate compartments. These weren't people who achieved greatness by avoiding their darkness. They achieved greatness by consciously engaging with it. They understood that authentic power comes not from perfection, but from integration, not from being good, but from being whole. The practical work of shadow integration begins with what Jung called active imagination, consciously dialoguing with the rejected aspects of yourself. This isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. It's about having honest conversations with the parts of yourself you've been trying to eliminate. What does your inner critic really need? What is your suppressed anger trying to protect? What wisdom does your hidden shame contain? But this process requires tremendous courage because it involves dismantling the identity you've spent your entire life constructing. When you begin to integrate your shadow, you realize that much of what you thought was you was actually a defensive reaction against parts of yourself you couldn't accept. Your personality itself might have been an elaborate compensation for qualities you learned to suppress. This is why shadow work often precipitates what feels like an identity crisis. You might find yourself questioning fundamental assumptions about who you are, what you want, and what your life means. The relationships that were built on your false self might become strained. The career that was chosen to maintain your persona might suddenly feel inauthentic. This isn't breakdown, it's breakthrough. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote about the concept of bad faith, the ways we lie to ourselves about our own freedom and responsibility to avoid the anxiety of authentic choice. Shadow integration requires confronting your own bad faith, acknowledging the ways you've been unconsciously limiting yourself to maintain psychological comfort. The rebellion also involves questioning your relationship to morality itself, not abandoning ethics, but recognizing that your current moral framework might be serving your psychological defenses rather than genuine wisdom. Many people use moral superiority as a way to avoid confronting their own capacity for the behaviors they condemn in others. True shadow integration leads to what Jung called moral relativism, not the belief that nothing matters, but the recognition that moral absolutes often serve to maintain psychological splitting. When you acknowledge your own capacity for every human behavior, you develop genuine compassion rather than judgmental righteousness. This process fundamentally changes how you relate to your purpose in life. Instead of trying to become some idealized version of yourself, you begin to discover what wants to emerge from your integrated wholeness. Your life's work stops being about proving your goodness and starts being about expressing your authentic nature. The people who find their true calling aren't those who eliminate their darkness, they're those who learn to work with it consciously. The healer who acknowledges their own capacity for harm becomes more effective because they understand suffering from the inside. The leader who owns their manipulative tendencies becomes more trustworthy because they're not unconsciously acting them out. This is the true rebellion, refusing to live a divided life, refusing to maintain the artificial split between acceptable and unacceptable parts of yourself, refusing to project your unconscious material onto the world and then fight it there. It's the courage to be complex, contradictory, and completely human. Here's the truth that Jung discovered, and that will change everything about how you see yourself and your place in the world. Your shadow isn't the opposite of your purpose. It is your purpose in disguise. Everything you've been running from, everything you've been trying to fix or eliminate about yourself, everything that fills you with shame or fear, these aren't obstacles to your authentic life. They're the raw materials from which your authentic life must be built. Your greatest wounds contain your greatest gifts. Your deepest fears point toward your most important work. Your most rejected qualities hold the keys to your most profound contributions. This is the paradox that unlocks everything. You cannot become who you're meant to be by avoiding who you are. You cannot fulfill your purpose by transcending your humanity. You fulfill it by embracing your humanity completely. The very experiences that seem to disqualify you from your calling are actually what qualifies you for it. Think about the people who have made the deepest impact on your life. Were they the ones who had everything figured out, who presented perfect facades, who seemed to have transcended all human struggle? Or were they the ones who had clearly wrestled with their demons and emerged not unscathed but transformed? The most powerful teachers, leaders, artists, and healers are inevitably those who have journeyed into their own darkness and brought back wisdom from that journey. This is why your shadow contains not just your capacity for destruction, but your capacity for creative power. The same psychological energy that could destroy you is the same energy that could transform you and everything you touch. The difference isn't in eliminating the energy. It's in learning to work with it consciously. Carl Jung understood this when he wrote about the process of individuation, the psychological journey toward becoming who you truly are. Individuation isn't about perfection. It's about integration. It's not about becoming good. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness includes everything: light and shadow, creation and destruction, love and hate, wisdom and foolishness. When you truly grasp this, you realize that your entire relationship to personal growth has been backwards. You've been trying to add positive qualities to yourself while subtracting negative ones, but Jung discovered that psychological development doesn't work through addition and subtraction. It works through integration and transformation. The alchemists, whom Jung studied extensively, understood this principle. They knew that you couldn't create gold by adding pure elements together. You had to start with base metals, with the raw, imperfect, rejected materials, and transform them through conscious application of heat and pressure. Your psychological gold isn't found by collecting spiritual insights or positive experiences. It's forged in the fire of engaging consciously with everything you'd rather avoid about yourself. This is why the people who try hardest to be good often create the most harm, while those who acknowledge their capacity for evil often do the most good. When you accept your complete humanity, you stop needing to prove your goodness through external actions. Instead, you can act from authentic choice rather than unconscious compensation. Your shadow work isn't just personal development, it's world service. Every time you integrate another aspect of your rejected self, you stop projecting that quality onto others. You stop needing to change, fix, or control other people to maintain your psychological equilibrium. You become a space where others can be fully human without judgment. This is perhaps the most profound realization. Your purpose isn't separate from your psychology. It emerges from your psychology. The specific combination of gifts and wounds, strengths and shadows, triumphs and traumas that make up your particular human experience isn't random. It's precisely calibrated to enable you to offer something unique to the world. The areas where you've suffered most deeply are often the areas where you're meant to serve most powerfully. The qualities you've struggled to accept about yourself are often the qualities that others most need you to model. The experiences that have broken you open are often what enable you to hold space for others' brokenness. When you stop trying to transcend your humanity and start embracing it completely, something miraculous happens. You discover that you don't need to become someone else to fulfill your purpose. You need to become more fully yourself. Your authentic gifts emerge not from your perfected self, but from your integrated self. This changes everything about how you approach your relationships, your work, your spiritual practice, and your contribution to the world. Instead of asking, "How can I become better?" you start asking, "How can I become more real?" Instead of trying to eliminate your problems, you start asking, "What are my problems trying to teach me?" Instead of avoiding your fears, you start investigating what your fears are protecting. The ultimate truth that Jung discovered is that consciousness itself evolves through the integration of opposites. Humanity's next evolutionary leap isn't about becoming more good, more spiritual, or more perfect. It's about becoming more conscious, more aware of the full spectrum of what we are, and more skillful in working with all of it. You are not broken and in need of fixing. You are not flawed and in need of improvement. You are a complete human being whose purpose emerges from the totality of your experience. Your shadow isn't your burden, it's your birthright. And when you finally have the courage to claim it, you'll discover that everything you thought was standing in the way of your authentic life was actually the path to it all along. The question isn't whether you'll do shadow work. Life will force you to confront your rejected aspects eventually. The question is whether you'll engage with this process consciously, transforming your wounds into wisdom and your darkness into light. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, And let me know in the comments what part of your shadow you're ready to stop running from.